That never gets old. The Jack Wheeler, alcoholic. And this is the toughest time slot in Alcoholics Anonymous because we all want a nap. And I miss Bob being up here because when I can't just slide the mic over. It's been a good weekend so far, and I've enjoyed myself, and more importantly, I've enjoyed being with all of you. In the big book, it says in the doctor's opinion, there's that paragraph, and it says that the alcoholic's problems pile up on him and become astonishingly difficult to solve. And I'm going to go down that road because my experience is all the guys I've sponsored, myself included, are staring at the astonishing pile of problems. Right? I mean, that's how we show up, and we want to fix all that stuff. You know, whether it's money. When I first came in, it was all of the above. It was her. It was the money. It was everything in my life was burned to the ground, and all I can think about is fixing that stuff. You know, trying to get my life back on track, and I measure it, but based on the things in the pile, right? And I had every problem you can imagine. I had money issues, business issues, employee issues, wife issues, kid issues. I had them all. And I can remember talking to Don one day, and you know, we come in here with that dialogue because it's the as we come in here, we've burned it all to the ground. And the cool thing is we come in and these loving men and women tell us to stop looking at the pile. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It makes no sense, you know, because I've measured everything in my life based on the things that I've burned to the ground. You know, whether it's my marriage or the kids or my parents or, you know, you guys know what the list is. You know what the pile looks like. And our eyeball is glued to that pile. And these men said lovingly to me, stop looking at the pile. The pile's not the problem. It seems very apparent to me that the pile is the problem. You know, and the dialogue we end up in with, for me, it was a man that loved me more than I thought I deserved, you know, more than I was available to. And he kept telling me to stop looking at the pile. You know, I wanted to talk about fixing my career. I wanted to talk about fixing my marriage. I wanted to talk about my kids treating me better. Still want to talk about that. And the reality is that we need to stop looking at the pile. And it is a tall order, to say the least. And, you know, they talk about the internal condition, and I have no language for that. I have no reference for that. You know, the way I was raised is we take care of life, and we're taken care of. And I had no capacity to take care of life. And that measuring stick and that place we end up is, and we talk a lot about past tense and when I first came in and all that, but I can tell you recently, I've been stuck on the pile, you know, and you know, it's like when you call your sponsor and the problem du jour, what is it these days? You know, for me, it's generally something going on with my kids or my wife or an employee or something like that. It's one of the relationships in my life. And I want to talk about that, you know, and he'll say, have you prayed about it? Or he'll ask me where God's in that. And I can tell him God's not paying close enough attention, you know. That's what it feels like, you know. And the reality is it's always me, you know. I have one of those bracelets that Sandy gave out to be the least disturbed person in the room, and and I'm working on all the wrong shit to become the least disturbed person in the room. And, I can tell you, recently, in the last few years, we sold the house on the ranch. I had 10 acres and built a home for my family on the ranch, and we spent 27 years up there. And we tried to sell the house for a long time, and we finally got the house sold. And that's when God's paying attention to me, is when the house sells. He's doing all the right things. And we got the house sold and closed, and we'd bought another house a few years before that. We moved into the house, and I don't know if it was 2 months later, but at some point I got a phone call from an attorney, and the attorney's telling me about there's bats in the attic of the house, and that they wanted us to pay to mitigate the bats. And I'm a pretty smart guy. I'm sitting there. You guys had due diligence. You did an inspection on the house. Tough luck, man. And I didn't say that. I listened to the attorney, and then I hung up the phone and I called Bob, and they wanted me to pay 10 grand to mitigate the bats. And I called up Bob and laid out the situation so he could see clearly that I was right. And Bob said to me, he said, money comes and goes. It's going to come around again. You should probably just pay the number for the bats. And I thought about it a little bit, and I went home and told Steph what Bob said, and she said, blah. She did not want to pay the 10 grand any more than I did, and she didn't agree with Bob. And we came to terms with it, and we decided we're going to pay the 10 grand. And about 2 weeks after that, the attorneys are working on the papers, and I get another phone call from the attorney, and the attorney says to me, we noticed that there's more bats, for one, and that you had drywalled over the attic access. And we're wondering why you did that. And I didn't tell him it was because there were bats in the attic. And he said, well, it's 25 grand. It's a much bigger issue. It's going to take a lot more work, and it's 25 grand to mitigate the bats. And at this point, I'm thinking, this sucks. And Bob was in Australia, so I called Steve, and I said to Steve, here's the deal. It was 10 grand, and I called Bob, and Bob basically said it's God's money, and then I should pay the money. And without missing a beat, Steve said, yeah, it's always God's money unless it's Bob's money. It didn't feel like God's money when it was 25 grand. It felt a lot like my money. And Steve and I talked for a little while, and he said, did you know about the bats? That's a key question, isn't it? I said, yeah, I knew about the bats, but I thought I had mitigated them, hence the drywall over the attic. And I thought I had done a good job mitigating the bats, but I did know about them. Steve said, you probably should pay the money. And so I made an arrangement to pay the 25 grand, and this is how I roll. We get the deal cut, and I'm down, speaker boy, down at a conference in Texas the day I'm supposed to wire the 25 grand, and I'm wandering around the hotel lobby trying to figure out what spiritual principle I can use not to send the 25 grand. But that's who we are, right? It's that constant. I had the 25 grand. 25 grand made no difference actually in my life in a meaningful way, but I just don't want to send my money, and I did send the money, and it got resolved, and everything was fine. But the reality is if you would have walked into my house, if one of the guys I sponsor here would have walked into my house and told me about the problem, I'd have told him to pay the money. I'd have had the same conversation that those guys had with me. But when it's my money, I can't see it. It's just, it feels different when it's your money. But the reality is one of those guys came to my house and we were sitting at my kitchen table talking about their money. I would have no problem putting the principles ahead of all of it. Because that's what we learn here, is we take responsibility for our actions, and in that conversation, I think that we get directed through trickery. I think sometimes our sponsors teach us to stop looking at the pile. We're not making a decision based on how much money it is. We're making the decision based on other things in our life. How important is it? How free do you want to be? Do you want to be free of this thing? And that's just a good example of how we put the principles in front of our feelings and our ego and all the other shit that comes up, and we're held in good stead one more time. The conversation we have here is, I know today that the pile that I'm looking at is not the problem. I know that the problem that that's staring me in the face all resolves in some way. And I can remember, my sponsor telling me we straighten out spiritually, and then we straighten out physically, mentally, and financially, and all the other stuff. And they won't tell you how long that's going to take. They won't tell you how much money you're going to have. They won't tell you what she's going to do to make things right. We walk down this road together, and things do just work out. And what I know today is that we straighten out spiritually first. And it's confusing as hell, because I come in here and I can tell you, when I quit drinking, my life got better. How could it not? I started to feel better. I started to act better. My wife started to think that possibly she could like me again. Those things just happened. And when we first quit, they happen in a significant way. Around here we call it the pink cloud, other things, and it's just because we start feeling better. I know that when I came in here, I just wanted relief. I didn't want to feel what I felt. I didn't want to be who I was. I wanted things to change. And when we stop drinking, that happens. And it's good enough for a little while, and at some point you're going to cross that bridge. And, you hear a lot about the second surrender and the third surrender and the fourth surrender. And there's a conversation that goes on here. And I can tell you my experience is I don't know how many there are. I know I don't like them when they happen. They get my attention. And to get my attention often requires a check for $25,000. And as we continue down this path, I'll be talking to a guy sponsor, and the cool thing is I have experience today in life. What's going on out there. The hardest question that I think there is to answer is, that's great, but what do we do out there? And we break things down, and we have that conversation. What does it look like to have an active 7-step in my life? What does it look like to have an active inventory process in my life? What does it look like to have a power greater than myself care for my will and my life? And I think that 10 and 11 are the conversation that does that. I heard all the things. I've been around this thing a long time. I've been in it for a long time. In's better than around, by the way. If you're around Alcoholics Anonymous, take your seat, man. Sit all the way down. And we start to learn what that looks like. And we can't quite put our finger on what's different. But things start changing in our lives, and I think that the least followed direction in the big book is for me to continuously watch me. It says we've entered the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. We continue to take personal inventory. What is it? I just did a 4th step, and for me, the 10th step is not a mini 4th step. For me, if there's anybody other than Jack in the first column, it's not step 10. Step 10 is where we learn to watch me, and that's a hard thing. I got this ego that is pointing out there, It's Bob's fault. It's Michael's fault. It's, anybody but Jack. And what the 10th step asks us to do is to watch my feet. What am I doing? To continuously watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear for Jack is a tough thing. Especially when I see it and Jack's the first column. It's like we get to the truth of our lives in the inventory process. This is who I really am. It's bad news a lot of times, but this is who I am. That's where the 10th step starts, is with me. And my ego doesn't want to look at me. It wants to look at you. It wants to blame and find fault and justify and rationalize. And I'm very good at it. I am a judgment machine. I can make everything your fault. And my ego thrives on that. And the journey in step 10 is to where I'm paying attention to Jack. What's going on? I was invited, and guys like me don't get invited places, but I was invited to take a private trip down the Grand Canyon in a rafting trip. And it was a buddy of mine in the program, and he pulled a private permit, and he called me up and said, "Do you want to go?" He knew I could handle the oars on a boat, and he said, "Do you want to go?" And I said, "Yeah, I absolutely want to go." And Steph and I decided to go on this trip down the Grand Canyon, and we're on day 6 or 7. I don't remember which day it was. I remember where we were, and we were at a place called Nankoweap. And Nankoweap is this unbelievable place in the canyon where there's ancient Indian ruins, and the canyon widens out a little bit, and the Indian ruins are up on the side of the cliff. And it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I get up in the morning and I'm sitting on a boulder at the bottom of the river watching the light show as the sun comes up. And it's cool because the sun comes up and it starts at the top of the canyon and it just lights up the wall real slow. And the whole canyon wall gets lit up and it's magnificent and it's beautiful. And the place is pristine, and I'm sitting there and praying, I'm meditating, I'm smoking a cigar, and it's all good, right? My motives are perfect. Everything is good. And I finish the cigar and I put it out on the side, take the cigar and I put it out on the side of the boulder, and I field stripped everything and put everything in my pocket. And I'm thanking God, and I start walking back to the camp. And as I get up from the boulder and start walking away, I see this great big ash mark on the boulder. And where I had sat there rubbing the ash against the thing and putting my cigar out. And, I was like, holy shit, that's terrible. And I went down to the river and I got sand and I got gravel and I got water, and I tried to clean that ash mark off the boulder because it just was wrong. We're a place of pristine and beauty, and everybody wants to protect it. And here I leave the ash mark on the side of the boulder, and I spent a long time trying to clean it. And I guarantee you today, if you went down there and you'd see an ash mark on the side of that boulder. It's worn down a little bit, it's cleaned a little bit, but there's an ash mark, great big round ash mark on the side of that boulder. And I'm not that quick, but a couple days later, the epiphany for me was that everywhere we go, leave a mark. Everywhere. Doesn't matter what our intentions are. I can be in that place where everything's perfect and I'm watching God light up the Grand Canyon. And I leave the mark on the side of the boulder. And I think if we can come to the place where we're paying attention to our own actions, we're learning to live in our own shoes in that way that the spiritual path asks us to, I'm going to leave the best mark possible everywhere I go. And I think that's what the 10th step is what mark are you leaving today? How you getting up and how you greeting your wife in the morning? How you greeting your kids? When grandkids are the best, man. doesn't matter where I am. It doesn't matter in the house. It doesn't matter where I'm sitting, what I'm doing. When my grandson hits the threshold of our door and the door opens, he runs to say hello to me every time, every single time. You know, that's the kind of mark I want to leave. You know, it's just instant joy, you know, and with my ego and the nature of who I am, I'm so concerned about what you're doing, how you're acting, how that affects me, you know, that it's hard for me to be in one place and leave the best mark. And it's subtle. But I think if we learn to actually look at ourselves and watch for selfishness, watch for fear, watch for dishonesty, you know, we have a much better shot at leaving a better mark. You know, because everywhere we go, we leave a mark. You know, this is a program of attraction. You know, are you attractive? You know, do you want them to see all of it? The journey in 10 and 11 has been one of me becoming and inventory work. It's been one of me becoming the same guy on both sides of my door. You know, I wanted to be the same guy on both sides of my front door forever. But it was important that I kept the door closed and you couldn't see in. You know, what I wanted you to do is base me on what I was showing you, not who I am. And sometimes when we live that way, it's hard to keep the secret, you know, because things slip out. And today, as I go through this journey, as I have these conversations in my life, you know, how much trouble can you get in a position of neutrality? It means neutral is an incredible, there's so much grace in that word. And it's available to us. It promises us, you know, that we ceased fighting everything and everybody. Think about it if you really did that. I have spent time in meditation on that. How do I show up? You know, have I really ceased fighting anything and everybody? You know, I had a client go sideways. I don't know, it was probably 18 months ago. And it was a big job and good client, good house, good project, high profile. And the client went sideways and was very, very angry with us. And the behavior that she showed us was poor. You know, she basically called me a buffoon. She called my daughter some other things. And basically told us that we had no idea what we're doing and blah, blah, blah. And what I said to them is I said, why don't you give us a couple days and we'll put some stuff together. So you know, what happened was the budget was a lot higher than they thought it should be, and which is always the case. And they were very angry. And I said to him, let me put it together and I'll show you why the budget is the way it is, and we'll have a conversation. We can bring the budget down if you want to, and left it at that. I said, give us a couple days and we'll put some stuff together and then we'll come back and meet. And we're getting ready to drive up there. I'm actually driving up there. I'm in my truck. And my daughter called me up. She was the PM on the job. And she said, I don't think we should work for these people. These people are awful, and I think we should just quit. You know, basically let them fire us, because that's where the conversation had gone. And I said to her, I said, Jess, just because their behavior is bad doesn't mean our behavior is going to be bad. I said, we're going to go in there and be principled and tell the truth and transparent and show them why it's this way and see what happens. And she was literally trying to convince me to let the job go. And I called my buddy Danny, because he's got experience in construction, and I said, Danny, here's what's going on. And I said, it's going to be heated. It's already heated, and we've got this meeting, and told him what was going on. And he said, well, you just be principled. And he said, what I want you to do, Jack, is I want you to invite God into the meeting. He said, not just invite God, but when you get to the meeting, I want you to open the door and let God go in first. And that sounds ridiculous and corny, and And I listened to him and I hung up the phone, and I got to the job and I opened the door and I invited God to go in first. I felt like a complete idiot when I was doing it 18 months ago. And I asked God to take the meeting for us. And we went in and we had a conversation. About 5 minutes into the meeting, everything shifted. Because we had taken the time, instead of reacting to them, we took actions based on principles, and we showed them why the budget was the way it was. And that, we can adjust anything. If you don't want to spend $5 million, try not spending $500,000 on cabinets. And we got through the meeting, and they changed the cabinet budget to $650,000, and they were happy about it. And the job finished wonderfully. It's been published, and they're thrilled and have a beautiful home. And we get to show up and let God take the meeting. And it sounds corny, it sounds trivial, and you hear things like that in Alcoholics Anonymous all the time. And I take actions I don't believe, and I get results I can't deny. That's the truth. Because I didn't believe that, me standing outside the door of the house and asking God to go in first would be effective. And it was perfect. And my daughter got to see that if we put these principles in the forefront of our lives and we live by them, that it works out. And that's just one story. I can tell you other stories. We're going into mediation with another client because he didn't pay his bill, and we were transparent, and we put the principles first, and he still didn't pay us. And so there's people like that out there. But because they're like that, I don't change my behavior. I continue to walk forward and put the principles in front of all of it. And in that process, I am changed, where I'm the guy telling someone else to allow God to go first. Ask God to take the meeting. So how does it look out there? That's what it looks like. I'm driving up to the meeting in my truck, and my daughter's calling me, and we're batting these things back and forth with each other. And she understands the principles, and she's willing to roll the dice, because that's what it feels like when I do it. It feels like I'm rolling the dice. This could go either way. And when it goes well, it's really easy for me to sit here and tell you, yeah, that house got published and everything went fine. My experience here is it doesn't always go that way, yet I am fine. I am good through it all. And that's what the 10-step teaches us is we take this journey, and that position of neutrality, safe and protected, is an address, man. It's where I want to live. And the only way a guy like me can get there is to take these actions, to do these things. And it helps when we're doing all of it. I joked around in here a couple of days, yesterday sometime, and I said that there's no days off. And my experience is there's no days off. If I do this every day, and that, think about continuously, think about just that word. That's all the time. And I can tell you, my life, I've always been looking out there. I'm always trying to find your mistake, your fault. Where were you wrong? How does that affect me? How can I manipulate you and get you to write the check or be different, act differently towards me? And as I go through this process and I get more time in the saddle, I loosen up the reins a little bit more. We spent 37 years running the ranch, and we took people out on hunting and fishing trips. And the hardest thing to teach anybody, we're getting some sketch places up in the mountains, and there was a spot on this one trail into one of our camps where when it snowed or rained, it got very, very slick. And the horses have steel shoes on them, and if you hit the certain rocks just right, the horse slips. And so one of the guides is always first going down, and you've got clients watching watching us, the lead horse go through, and the horse is slipping and sliding and gets down through there. And they're coming up, and the hardest thing to do is what we ask them to do. Drop the reins. Trust the horse. And we don't, it's so against our nature to do that. But that's what God's asking me to do, is drop the reins. Trust the horse. And they finally, you convince them to drop the reins, and the horse takes us through. The horse will get through that no problem. It's when we're yanking on the reins and things that the horse gets in trouble. And it's a hard thing. It's counterintuitive to who I am. And I've learned more and more to drop the reins. And the 11th step, we get confused sometimes. And when in the beginning I thought the 10th step was about thinking about something or knowing I was wrong and making amends promptly. And you'd ask me about it, and I'd tell you all about the amends I made. And the amends, promptly admitting it I was telling Don something in the kitchen down in Texas and complaining about something and how it had been going on a few days. And from the other room, I hear Karen say, "Jack, you only get one chance at promptly." And that's funny, but I'm here to tell you, you only get one chance at promptly. And then it starts eating your lunch, slowly, And with the 10th, in the beginning of the 11th step, it asks us to do an evening review. And that's where the 11th step starts. And if you look at the evening review and look at it in this context, I think you'll find that if you do it for a while, that it's true. It's a check on my 10th step. How'd I do today? Where was I selfish? Where was I dishonest? Where was I afraid? What did I do about it? Did I talk to another man? Did I ask God to get involved? Did I make amends promptly? That means during the day when something came up and I did something wrong, did I own it right then? Did I tell somebody I was sorry? Did I ask them what I can do to make it right? Those types of things, that type of question is not intuitive to me. And what my experience is when I started doing the 11th step and seeing where I had screwed things up and I hadn't taken care of it promptly, or I kept a secret, or try answering the question, was I kind and loving toward all? Try doing it for 30 days straight. Tell me how it goes. Arrogant indifference doesn't count. Was I kind and loving toward all today? And there's a lot of days today that I can say, yes, I was. So it proposes a few questions for us to look at how our day went. And it gives me insight into how I can do better with the 10th step, how I can do better with watching these things as in real time, man, as it's going on. And then it asks us on awakening. And I can tell you that if you're like me, I thought I had to have a quiet mind to meditate. I don't have a quiet mind very often, it was a barrier. And I sat down with my sponsor one day, and he said to me, "Jack, what are you thinking about if you can't get quiet?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking about the day usually." He said, "That's interesting. That's what the directions tell us to do." I don't have to have a quiet mind to meditate. This is the equipment I got, man. This is how I show up. Meditation was hard for me. And Don asked me how my 11th step and my 10th step was going. I said, "It's good." He said, "Did you pray and meditate this morning?" I said, "No, I didn't." "Why not?" I said, "Well, I'm very busy, Don. I got a business and I got kids and I got all the excuses." And he said, "Jack, what I want you to do is when you get up in the morning and put your dogs out, I want you to sit down in a chair and read something." Okay. He He said, I want you to do it for 2 minutes. 2 minutes. And I started doing it. And I can tell you I'd sit there like a good student, and I'd look at my watch and 30 seconds had gone by. I'd look at my watch again and it was 40 seconds. And then I know I'm getting close and it was 55 seconds. And that went on for a while. And then one day I had read something and I was sitting quietly and I realized I'd been sitting there for 10 minutes. And then one day it was 30 minutes. You know, we don't get good at this stuff until we do it for a while. You know, it's that we learn, you know, and I get that detachment from my thoughts that we so eagerly, desperately want. And I can have a million things going on in my head and I can still get quiet with God because I've practiced it long enough. And then somebody threw, maybe you should do that a couple times a day. Well, I'm not interested in doing it a couple times a day. And he said, what I want you to do is just when you roll up to a construction site, just take 2 seconds and say, God, come on. And I started doing that. And now generally when I roll up to someplace new during the day, I take a few minutes and sit quietly and invite God in again. You know, the 11-step practice took a long time for it to come to where it is today, and I think it's supposed to. You know, we thrive in Alcoholics Anonymous on scar tissue. You know, I see the cartoons of the kids. I'll give you 25 cents if you let me see your scar, let me see your injury. You know, we're like that. You know, but we come in here and we share the foibles of our lives. You know, I can remember Don, when it first started, I had a hard time with it, and I went back to Don and I was telling him, it's not going well. He said, but are you doing it? I said, yeah, I'm doing it. And he said, well, what happens if you don't let the dogs out in the morning? I said, well, they shit on the floor, Don. And he said, well, that's what you're doing to your day. And, you know, little things like that just kind of pushed me in the right direction. I understand that language. You know, I understand exactly what he was talking about. And little by slowly, I developed a practice of getting quiet. Now I do it all the time, you know, and it's just become part of the fabric of who I am. Are there times that are better than others? No, but there's times where I judge myself more than others. There's times where I'll sit in a room like this and somebody will be up here sharing about their practice and I'm thinking, man, I suck. It's just it's the nature of being a human being. And the reality is I have a practice that works for me. I have a practice, I can show you that it's outlined in the book exactly how I do it. And the reality is that's just my ego. You know, because may not be your experience. Don't let anybody read your big book for you. It's designed for you to have a personal experience with it. And the only thing I've ever learned that changes me is my actions. If I do something long enough, I have a personal experience with it. And the minute I have a personal experience with it, you can't touch it. You can't convince me it's wrong. Because it's real. I was going turkey hunting. I was I don't know, 10, 11, 12, 13 years sober, whatever it was. And I'm going turkey hunting, and I got it set up to meet the guy at 5:30 in the morning. And we were going to go up on the mountain. It was probably 40 miles from where he lived. And I showed up at his house at 5:30. And he's sitting inside the house drinking coffee. And I'm like, we're ready to go. And I said to him, I said, what's up? I said, we're supposed to be up on the mountain. The sun's coming up. We need to get going. And he said to me, he said, Jack, you're ready to just go seize the day, aren't you? I said, yes, Bobby, I am ready to go seize the day. And I said, we're supposed to be up on the mountain. We're going turkey hunting. He said, Jack, what I want you to do is sit down here and we're going to read something out of this book, one of those daily readers that makes us late everywhere we're going. And he said, I want you to sit down here and we're going to read something and we're going to have a cup of coffee and we're going to pray and then we're going to get quiet for a little while and then we're going to go join the day. It's God's day. You know, what a difference. And I remember the hair stood up on the back of my neck. You know, we're the guys, you know, we're men. We got to go seize the day, take control of it, make it happen, right? Isn't that the way we all roll? And I can tell you today that I try and join the day. The day was just fine without me. And those little things are in a conversation about living on a spiritual path. You know, and that's what's become real for me is how do I do this and have a life? How do I do this? And what I can tell you is it's folded in beautifully. You know, it has become just part of who I am. I got a button on the visor on my truck. And it's a circle and the triangle, and it says "Get in the truck," and it's got a bucking horse on it. And you know that get in the truck, let's go. That's how I'm wired. You know, constant motion. And what I've found here is that some of the most incredible times I've had is when I get to slow down and just be present. And that's when things are good and when things are bad. I was, as you have figured out by now, I'm a contractor. I was raised in the construction industry, and my dad was a contractor for a long time. And after, I don't know, my dad was probably my age, and he started working for me. And when things weren't busy at the ranch, he'd come run things for me and help me out at the company, and was involved with everything, and he's driving around in a company truck, which he wrecked, paybacks, and you know, it's just he's part of the company, and I'm sitting and a lot of guys in the program work for the company or have their own company that's doing work for the company or whatever. There's a lot of guys in AA involved, and I'm sitting up on the third floor of this house we're building in Aspen. And I'm just checking things out, and I can hear my dad down in the bottom of the stairwell. And we had just hired a new guy. And the new guy comes in, and my dad says to him, he's not even in the door, he says, "Are you an alcoholic?" And I'm just listening from the third floor, and the guy says, "No, but my wife thinks I am." And so here's this new guy, has no idea what he's in for, and my dad's asking if he's an alcoholic. And what my dad said to him, "Well, you should talk to my son if your wife thinks you are." Which is, you can't make that shit up. The guy lasted about 2 days. And he thought, he saw the error in his ways. And but we roll through this process in 1 through 11, and we become changed. You know, when it says that having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps is one of the greatest promises in the book. And the 12th step looks like that in my life, where a guy shows up at work and my dad wants to know if he's an alcoholic, and he has no idea what he's walking into. And, you know, the only reason we're here is because we're message carriers. And if we don't do it, who will do it? You know, there's a lot of stuff going on with Alcoholics Anonymous these days. And we should be part of that conversation for one reason, and one reason only. Because we're the owners. There's no us and them in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just us. And we sit around and we watch these things go on at the General Service Office and the publishing companies, and we say, what are they doing? It's our responsibility. It's our watch. What are we doing? It's not us and them. And we have a responsibility right now, probably more than ever, to take an interest in what's going on and hold our principles up in front of those meetings as we go in, to ask God to take the meeting. And I'm the guy that'll sit in my home group back home and just badmouth them. Who are they? And what I know today is I have a responsibility. I think when we talk about the amends practice, my dad, when I first made amends to him way back when, I said to him, I have no idea how much money I owe you. No clue. And he knew, if it wasn't nailed down and I needed money, I sold it. I sold one of his trucks because I have the same name he does. I could sign the title. I'm John H. Wheeler the Fourth. And it didn't say the third on the title, so I could sign the title. And I sold his truck. How do you make amends for that? How do you make amends for, I had no idea how much money, and I said that to him. I said, Dad, I have no idea how much money it is, but whatever you want me to do, I'll do. And he said to me, he said, I'll take care of the money. And he said, you take care of your sobriety. And for the last 20 years, I don't know if it's pretty regular. There'll be a bill that comes across on one of my accounts where he's filled his vehicle with fuel, or he's bought something at the lumber yard, or he's had lumber delivered to the ranch. And Steph will come up to me and say, is this part of the amends? And I'm like, I don't know, I guess so. And he's done that for 20 years. It happened in the last couple months. There was a bill that came in, Steph said, is this part of it? And I said, apparently. But the cool thing is he took care of it, and he's good with it, and I'm good with it, and there's forgiveness, and we're healed. And I never noticed the money. It never even came up. And when it says that we practice these principles in all our affairs, that's what it's talking about. How am I showing up at home? How am I showing up at work? I wanted to have a conversation with Seth about work ethic and professional conduct and all this shit. Instead, I got to hear about something that's just tearing him up. And I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be the guy that's throwing the old jokes around. I want to be a guy that's supporting him spiritually. I want to be a guy that's supporting the guys that work for me. There's a guy in here, a sponsor, that works for me. And, I can sit here and talk about this with him in the room because I'm the same guy on both sides of my door. And it's not perfect, but we're trying to get to that place where when we're the same guy on both sides of our door, there's nothing to hide, man. It's all good. And that happens through working these steps. It happens as a result of taking these actions consistently, continuously. Guys know that if they've been around me any length of time, they've heard me say we do regular things regularly in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's been a long time since I went to a meeting because I needed a meeting. It has. People have come up to me and challenged me on that and said, what are you talking about? You need meetings. I didn't say I didn't need meetings. I just said it's been a long time since I went to a meeting because I needed a meeting. I go because it's my spiritual responsibility to carry this message. It's my spiritual responsibility to shout the good news. Alcoholics Anonymous is the best deal in town if you're a guy like me. And if we don't say it, who will? They don't believe us. Oh yeah, right. Alcoholics Anonymous, that's what I was always looking for. And I'm here to tell you that Alcoholics Anonymous is the best deal in town if you're a guy like me. And I get to be a part of it. I get to live it in my life because of that transformation of heart that happens. And I'm the same guy on both sides of my door. And that is absolutely miraculous. That you can take the guy that walked in here, and this is the guy that stands up in front of you today and says, this is the best deal in town for guys like us. Thanks.